In 9 minutes, Judge Clarence Thomas accused Press Secretary Caroline Levit of treason, threatening to jail her right in the courtroom as cameras recorded live. Millions of Americans watched on screens. But no one expected Levitt to pull a crumpled letter from a grieving mother who lost her son in a military operation out of her leather briefcase. The courtroom fell silent. Jurors were moved. Reporters were stunned, and Thomas's hands trembled. That truth shattered the accusation, awakening the nation. This was no longer a trial, but an undeniable moment when Levitt stepped forward alone in carrying the truth. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. In the heart of Washington, D.C., a city often cloaked in the solemn grey of power, a cold morning dawned. Heavy clouds, like a dark omen, hung low over the federal courthouse, casting long, foreboding shadows. Inside, the air crackled with an almost unbearable tension. Every seat in the federal courtroom was packed, reporters clinging to their recorders. Like lifelines, senators stiffly upright, their expressions a mixture of grim anticipation and thinly veiled curiosity. The public, a silent breathing mass, held its collective breath, eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding before them. Cameras panned slowly across the room, capturing an atmosphere so sharp it felt like a honed blade poised to strike. Whispers, like venomous serpents, slithered through the hushed room. The rumors were grim, almost unbelievable. Caroline Levit, the youngest White House spokesperson in history, stood accused of treason. The charges stemmed from alleged leaks concerning Operation Unveils, a military endeavor that had tragically failed, costing soldiers their lives and shattering countless families. The nation, glued to screens across the country, watched, captivated by the unfolding drama. Then, the heavy oak doors creaked open, and Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas entered. His black robe billowed around him, a dark, imposing shroud. As he moved, with a grave authority that commanded immediate silence, his piercing eyes, renowned for their intensity, scanned the room, missing nothing, settling finally on the defendant's table. Thomas, known for his stoic silence on the bench, was not merely an observer today. He was the one in control, the architect of Levitt's fate. The sharp crack of his gavel shattered the stillness, a sound like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet, and the courtroom's atmosphere, already suffocating, turned stifling. This was no longer just a court of law. It had become an iron cage, a crucible where the raw power of the state was about to collide head-on with an audacious truth. All eyes swiveled to the defendant's podium, awaiting the moment Caroline Levit would appear. The heavy wooden courtroom door, like a theatrical curtain, creaked open again, breaking the suffocating silence. All eyes turned to the entrance, and there she was, Caroline Levit. She walked with steady steps, neither fast nor slow, each footfall a quiet, resolute declaration. Her fitted red dress, modern yet understated, accentuated her petite but undeniably resolute frame. In her hand she held a worn leather briefcase, its edges bearing the faint scratches of countless journeys. There was no lawyer by her side, no advisor, no one to shield her, just her, facing an entire system. The crowd held its breath. A young reporter in the front row, hands trembling as she took notes, whispered to a colleague, "She's crazy, coming alone like this." In the back row, a senator smirked, muttering something about youthful arrogance. But Levitt looked at no one. Her eyes, unwavering, locked onto the judge's bench where Clarence Thomas sat, motionless as a stone statue. She placed her briefcase on the defendant's table, her movement slow, almost ceremonial. The quiet click of the briefcase's latch rang out, a small sound, but enough to startle a few. A strange atmosphere spread through the room. Not fear, but a taut anticipation. She stood tall, hands lightly clasped in front of her, her posture, not that of a defendant, but of someone poised for battle. The courtroom, once buzzing with hushed whispers, now fell deathly silent, as if every soul present was waiting for a spark. Thomas struck his gavel again, the sharp sound cutting through the stillness, a demand for order in a room already holding its breath. He offered no greetings, no preamble, his voice deep, resonant, and carrying the unyielding weight of decades of authority. "Caroline Levit," he began, his eyes fixed on her, unwavering. "You are summoned today for actions that directly threaten national security. This court has evidence that you deliberately disclosed classified information about the military operation, Operation Unveils, causing severe consequences." He paused, a calculated silence, as if to let his words sink like lead into everyone in the room. "This constitutes treason. You will answer before this court under oath." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, a tidal wave of shock and intrigue. A reporter, startled, dropped a pen, its clatter echoing amid the whispers of treason. A woman in the audience covered her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. In a far corner, a senator's aide typed furiously, surely sending breaking news back to their office. Yet through it all, Leavitt didn't flinch. She stood there, unmoving, a solitary rock in a raging flood. Thomas raised his hand, signaling for silence, and the courtroom obeyed instantly, only the heavy breathing of a few remaining audible. "Specifically," he continued, his voice sharper now, like a honed blade, "you posted a message on the X platform alluding to details about the death of soldier James Bennett in Operation Unveils. This action not only violated national security laws, but also endangered ongoing operations." He leaned forward, his gaze locked on Leavitt. "Do you understand the gravity of this accusation?" Levitt's face showed no flicker of emotion, no blinking, no pursed lips, no trembling. She raised her head, her gaze meeting Thomas's directly, not with defiance, but with an eerie, profound calm, as if she had long prepared for this exact moment. The room waited for a rebuttal, a plea, or even a bowed head, but instead she smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile, yet enough to make a reporter in the front row jot down in shock, "She's not afraid." Then she spoke, her voice clear, not loud, but resonating through the hushed room like a bell. "Judge Thomas," she said, each word delivered like a carefully loaded bullet. "Before we proceed, I have one question. Have you read what's in this briefcase?" Her hand rested lightly on the worn leather case, fingers tracing its surface. The question hung in the air, not a threat, but an invitation, as if she were opening a door to a secret. The courtroom froze. A juror leaned forward unconsciously. A reporter forgot to press the record button, mouth slightly agape. Thomas, for the first time, seemed off balance. His eyebrows furrowed slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it as if realizing Levitt's question was not simple. The sound of heartbeats seemed audible in the silent room. Levitt didn't wait for his answer. She took one step forward, just one, but enough to make the room feel its weight. "Let's begin," she said, her voice calm, but sharp as a blade. "Because the truth doesn't wait." She opened the briefcase, the click sounding like a starting gun. She didn't look at the crowd, the jury, or Thomas, who sat on the bench with eyes cold as stone. She focused only on what was in her hands. From the briefcase, Levitt pulled out a thin, crumpled sheet of paper, its corners curled as if it had been opened and folded hundreds of times. A faint coffee stain marked the bottom edge, a small tear patched with clear tape. It wasn't a legal document, not an official memo, just a letter. But the way she held it, both hands gently cradling it like a fragile treasure, made the room feel its immense weight. A reporter in the front row stopped typing, hands frozen mid-air. A juror, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, leaned forward unconsciously, Levitt took a deep breath and began to read, her voice low, clear, unwavering, but carrying a quiet strength like a river flowing beneath ice. "I am Laura Bennett," she read, each word seeping into the air like ink spreading on paper. "I write this letter because I have no one left to beg. My son, James Bennett, died in an operation I was never told the name of. They came to my house with a folded flag and 3 men in uniform. They called Nathan a hero, but no one told me how he died." The courtroom fell silent. The crowd's breathing, once rapid like waves, now seemed trapped. A woman in the audience, hands clasped tightly, began biting her lip, eyes glistening. Levitt continued, her voice not loud, but each sentence like a hammer striking the wall of silence. "I asked why. They said classified. I begged to meet someone, anyone who knew what happened. They told me to go home, that national security mattered more than my pain. But every night when I close Nathan's door, I know they're hiding something." A juror, an older woman with a silk scarf around her neck, covered her mouth, shoulders trembling slightly. A reporter, scribbling furiously moments before, stopped, eyes fixed on Levitt. The letter was short, but each line carved itself into the space, turning the courtroom into something beyond a court, a place to confront pain. Levitt paused, looked up, her gaze sweeping the room. "This isn't legal evidence," she said, her voice firm but not loud. "This is the voice of a mother stripped of the truth." She held up the letter, letting the light from the window shine through, highlighting its creases and stains. "This letter was sent to the White House, to the press office where I work. I found it among thousands of letters, but this was the only one that kept me awake. My superiors told me to destroy it, that it didn't matter. But I kept it because James Bennett isn't a number in a report. He was Laura Bennett's son, and he deserves to be remembered." The courtroom's atmosphere shifted. The initial mockery, the smirks from the crowd, had vanished. A senator in the back row, who had shaken his head when Levitt entered, now looked down, rubbing his forehead. A young reporter, eyes red, quickly wiped tears with her sleeve, trying not to let colleagues see. Clarence Thomas, still as a statue on the bench, showed signs of unease. His hand on the table tightened, knuckles whitening. He opened his mouth as if to interrupt, but then closed it, as if realizing any words now would be meaningless. Leavitt stepped away from the defendant's table, approaching the jury, the letter still in hand. She didn't raise it high or make gestures. She simply held it, letting it speak for her. "Laura Bennett doesn't want money or fame," she said, her voice slow, like telling an ancient tale. "She just wants to know how her son spent his final moments, what he said, what he felt. But the government, the people in rooms like this, chose silence. They chose national security over a mother's heart." A small sob broke from the audience. A man, likely a veteran, with a military emblem on his cap, bowed his head, shoulders shaking. The jury, once maintaining neutrality, could no longer hide their emotions. The woman with the silk scarf dabbed her eyes with it. The man with salt and pepper hair clenched his fists, staring at the floor as if wrestling with himself. Levitt stood in the center of the room, small but like an unquenchable flame. She placed the letter on the table, her movement gentle, like laying a flower on a grave. "We're here to talk about treason," she said, her voice now stronger, not shouting, but an unshakable affirmation. "But what is real treason? Seeking the truth or burying the voices of people like Laura Bennett?" She paused, letting her words hang in the heavy air. "I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here so James Bennett and those like him can be heard." The courtroom was no longer a place of judgment. It had become a sacred space where pain was weighed against power. The cameras, used to capturing legal arguments, now zoomed in on Levitt's face, not the face of a defendant, but of someone carrying a torch. Thomas on the bench remained silent, but his gaze was no longer icy. Something wavered in him, if only for a moment. Laura Bennett's letter, still on the defendant's table, was like a smouldering flame, melting the court's cold walls. The air was heavy, no longer filled with mocking whispers or skeptical glances. There was only anticipation, taut like a string, about to snap. Leavitt, small but unyielding, placed her hand on the worn leather briefcase. She didn't smile or perform, just quietly unlatched it, the click sounding like a heartbeat in the silent room. She pulled out a stack of documents, not crumpled like the letter, but crisp white pages with sharp black text, stamped declassified, in bold red at the corner. The cover read, Operation Unveils Internal Report, with numbers and codes only. Insiders would understand. She placed the documents on the table, her movements deliberate, like a chess player placing a decisive piece. The camera zoomed in, capturing every detail, the stamp, the signature, and a redacted line now restored. The crowd stirred slightly, a reporter whispering, "Is she for real?" Levitt held the first page, her voice ringing out, not loud, but strong, enough to pierce the silence. This is the official report on Operation Unveils, declassified 7 days ago, she said, eyes locked on the jury. It tells a different story from what the government wants us to believe. On March 14th, James Bennett, 24, was wounded in an ambush in the Middle East. She paused, letting the words sink in. 38 minutes. He was breathing, had a pulse, but there was no defibrillator, no full medical team. Life-saving equipment was diverted to a private military contractor. A soft groan rose from the audience. A juror, the man with the grey tie, clenched his fists, eyes fixed on the documents. Levitt turned to the next page, pointing to a paragraph. The report clearly states, the patient showed signs of survival if timely intervention had occurred. No action was taken. Not an accident, not battlefield chaos. This was a choice. Her word choice cut like a knife, causing a young reporter to drop her pen, the clatter echoing in the stillness. Clarence Thomas, on the bench, gripped the edge of his desk. He opened his mouth, his voice low but sharp. Miss Levitt, these documents have not been verified in court. You are disrupting procedure. But Levitt didn't turn to look at him. She continued, her voice unchanged. They've been declassified, Your Honor. The truth doesn't need your permission to exist. The statement made a few spectators gasp, as if witnessing a direct blow. Thomas frowned but said no more, as if realizing he was losing control. Levitt turned to the side door of the courtroom, giving a slight nod. The door opened, and a woman entered. Laura Bennett, Nathan's mother, short in stature, her grey hair neatly tied back. She wore a dark green coat, holding a small framed photo, walking slowly but steadily, like someone accustomed to pain but never defeated. The crowd watched, no one daring to breathe loudly. Laura stopped near the witness stand, her eyes locking onto Thomas, not with anger but with a deep sadness, as if she were seeing through him. Levitt nodded slightly, handing the microphone to Laura. Her voice, when it emerged, was hoarse but steady. "I am Laura Bennett," she said, raising the framed photo. Nathan in his military uniform, smiling brightly beside an old car. "This is my son. He wanted to be a pilot, to soar higher than my dreams, but 2 years ago they brought him back in a coffin, and no one told me why." She paused, taking a breath, her gaze never leaving Thomas. "They told me Nathan died for his country, but now I know he died because people like you chose profit over lives." The courtroom felt drained of air. A young female juror with curly hair covered her mouth, eyes red. A veteran in the back row wearing a medal bowed his head. Shoulders trembling, Laura raised the photo higher, her voice growing stronger, as if speaking for every mother who lost a child. "I don't need apologies. I need the truth. Nathan isn't a statistic in your reports. He was my son, and he deserved to be saved. Levitt stood beside her, silent, letting Laura's words echo. She didn't intervene or add anything, but her gaze sweeping the courtroom burned like fire. The camera zoomed in on Laura's face, then shifted to Thomas. He sat motionless, but his hands, once steady, now trembled slightly on the desk. A reporter in the corner typed rapidly. "The courtroom is crumbling," a spectator whispered. "She did it." Laura set the photo down, her eyes still fixed on Thomas. "Do you have children, Your Honor?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Do you know what it's like to lose a piece of yourself and not know why?" The question hung in the air, needing no answer, but it pierced the heart of everyone in the room. Thomas didn't respond, his gaze dropping for the first time in the trial. Levitt stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Laura's shoulder, a silent gesture of comfort. She turned to the jury, her voice now sharper, but still not shouting. "These documents and Mrs. Bennett's words aren't here to convict anyone. Today, they're to remind us that the truth cannot be buried forever. James Bennett was abandoned, and those who gave that order still sit here in seats of power." Caroline Levit stood quietly by the defendant's table, her gaze sweeping the courtroom, where the air now felt thick as fog. Laura Bennett's letter and testimony had turned the courtroom into a sacred space where the truth began to bleed through the cracks of power. The jury, the audience, even the hardened reporters were swept into James Bennett's story, their earlier cynicism replaced by a dawning comprehension, a collective ache. But Leavitt wasn't done. She placed her hand on the worn leather briefcase, fingers lightly tracing it like a conductor preparing for the crescendo. The click of the latch echoed, small but sharp, like a bell signaling what was to come. She didn't pull out more papers or photos this time. Instead, she held up a small device, a sleek black USB, glinting under the courtroom lights, unassuming yet radiating an immense, almost dangerous power. "This," she said, her voice calm but sharp as a freshly honed blade, "is what those in the shadows don't want us to hear." She handed the USB to a court officer who hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously between Levitt and Judge Thomas before finally plugging it into the audio system. The crowd stirred slightly, a ripple of anxious energy. A reporter whispered, "What is she doing?" A juror, the young woman with curly hair, clenched her fists, eyes fixed on Levitt, leaning forward as if to catch every nuance. But before the audio played, Levitt signaled toward the side door. It opened, and a woman entered. Dr. Rachel Collins, about 40, with short brown hair, wearing a simple white coat that seemed almost too stark in the courtroom's solemnity. Her eyes, though, revealed long, sleepless nights, a profound weariness etched into their depths. She walked with the weight of someone carrying an unbearable burden, each step heavy with memory. The cameras followed her, capturing the slight tremble in her hands as she stood at the witness stand, a silent testament to the emotional toll she carried. Levitt nodded, handed her the microphone, and Rachel began. "I am Rachel Collins, a military doctor," she said, her voice as if each word was dug from deep within her soul. 2 years ago, I served at a medical station in the Middle East, where James Bennett was brought. She paused, taking a breath, her gaze lost in the distance, as if reliving that agonizing moment. He was badly wounded, but alive. I saw his chest rise and fall, heard his faint breathing. He gripped my hand, whispered, "Tell my mom not to worry." Her voice caught, a raw, painful gasp. I promised to save him. The courtroom fell into absolute, suffocating silence. A spectator, the man in the veteran's cap, bowed his head, his hand covering his eyes, perhaps reliving his own unspoken horrors. Rachel continued, her voice now trembling, not from fear, but from a surge of long-suppressed emotion. But I had no equipment, no defibrillator, no sufficient blood-clotting drugs. I begged my superiors for support, but they said, "This is classified, no intervention." I watched Nathan slip away right in front of me, and I could do nothing. She gripped the microphone, knuckles white against the metal. He didn't die because of the enemy. He died because we abandoned him. A sob broke from the audience. A juror, the man with the grey tie, turned away, shoulders shaking uncontrollably. The camera zoomed in on Rachel's face, her eyes red but tearless, as if she had long cried herself dry. Levitt stood nearby, silent, letting Rachel's testimony sweep through the room like a cold, inescapable wind. Clarence Thomas on the bench gripped his gavel tightly, his lips pursed, but his eyes began to waver, a flicker of something unsettling, as if he sensed the battle tilting irrevocably toward Levitt. Rachel looked directly at Thomas, her voice now stronger, as if drawing strength from her profound pain. "I've lived with that memory every day. I see Nathan in my dreams, hear him calling for his mom. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, but to say the truth cannot be buried forever." She set the microphone down, stepped away from the stand, but her eyes remained fixed on Thomas like an accusation without words. Levitt stepped forward, taking the microphone. "Dr. Collins's words do not stand alone," she said. Her voice, now sharp as steel, cut through the residual emotion. She signaled to the court officer, and the courtroom speakers crackled with static. Then a voice emerged, low, cold, unmistakable. "If his mother digs too deep, let her get lost in the paperwork. This can't get out." The voice belonged to Clarence Thomas, recorded from a secret call. The courtroom felt drained of air. A reporter dropped her recorder, the clatter echoing like a bell of doom. A young female juror gasped, eyes wide with horror and recognition. Levitt didn't stop. She pulled an iPhone from her pocket, fingers swiping quickly. "I just posted this recording on X," she said, her voice calm but utterly defiant. "The whole world is listening right now." The cameras zoomed in on her phone. Screen showing thousands of shares in seconds, the numbers climbing exponentially. The audience buzzed, a rising tide of shouts and gasps. Someone yelled, "She actually did it!" Thomas slammed his gavel down with a furious roar. "Miss Levitt, you are violating court rules!" But the sound of his gavel was utterly drowned out by the growing whispers and exclamations from the crowd, a tidal wave of public outrage. Levitt turned to Thomas, her gaze no longer that of a defendant, but of someone wielding the truth, an unstoppable force. "Rules?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp as a knife. "What rules let you hide James Bennett's death? What rules protect those who choose money over lives?" She held up the USB like a weapon, small yet devastating. "This isn't a rumor. This is your voice, ordering the burial of a mother, a family, a truth." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters typed frantically. Phones lit up across the gallery as spectators shared the news, becoming participants in the story. A juror, the man with salt and pepper hair, looked at Thomas with eyes no longer respectful, only deeply disappointed. Thomas sat motionless, his hand gripping the gavel, but not striking again. His face, once like stone, now showed a crack. Not fear, but the chilling realization he had lost control, completely and irrevocably. "Levitt," he rasped, but the word was lost in the din. She placed the USB on the table, her gaze sweeping the jury. "We're not here to judge me," she said, her voice now resounding like a call to action. "We're here to judge the system that abandoned James Bennett and those like him. The truth doesn't need a courtroom to win. It just needs to be heard." The recording of Clarence Thomas's voice had thrown the room into utter chaos. Reporters typed furiously, their keyboards clattering a frantic rhythm. Spectators whispered, their voices a rising tide of disbelief and outrage. Thomas, on the bench, sat motionless, his hand gripping the gavel tightly, but his eyes, for the first time, betrayed a crushing defeat. Laura Bennett's letter, the declassified documents, Dr. Rachel Collins' raw testimony, all had turned the courtroom into an arena where the truth could no longer be restrained, no longer hidden. But Levitt, small in her red dress, wasn't finished. She returned to the defendant's table, her gaze gliding over the worn leather briefcase, but her hand didn't touch it. Instead, she walked to a corner of the room where a simple, overlooked object stood, an old wooden chair. Its legs were scarred, its seat worn smooth by time. It didn't belong in the formal solemnity of the courtroom. It was a piece from an ordinary home, a place where family meals once took place, laughter echoing, dreams shared. Levitt gripped the chair's back, pulling it to the center of the room, placing it before the jury. The wood scraped the floor with a quiet creak, a small sound, but enough to draw every eye. She didn't speak immediately. She stood by the chair, her hand resting lightly on its back, fingers tracing the scratches as if reading an invisible book. "This," she began, her voice, low but clear like a storyteller before a hushed crowd, "is James Bennett's chair. He sat here in his mother's kitchen every morning before enlisting. He ate toast, talked about his dream of being a pilot, and promised to fix the old car in the yard." She paused, her gaze sweeping the jury, letting the image settle in their minds. "Now this chair is empty, and it will be empty forever." The courtroom fell silent, not from fear, but from a profound reverence. A juror, the woman with curly hair, bowed her head, hands covering her face. A spectator, the man in the veteran's cap, clenched his fists, eyes on the floor as if facing his own aching memories. The cameras panned slowly, capturing the chair. Simple, ordinary, but now as if carrying the very soul of someone lost. Levitt stood there, not performing, not emphasizing, but her quiet presence made the chair the absolute focus of every gaze. She turned to the side door, giving a slight signal. The door opened, and a young girl stepped in. Emma Bennett, 12 years old, wearing a pale green sweater, her hair in a neat ponytail. She was small, but her steps were steady, clutching something tightly in her hands. The crowd watched. No one. Daring to breathe loudly, Emma stopped beside Levitt, her innocent eyes scanning the courtroom, then resting on the chair. She didn't cry, but her lips were pressed tightly, as if holding back a promise. Levitt knelt down, eye level with Emma, and handed her the microphone. The girl's voice, when it spoke, was soft but clear, like a bell in the wind. "Nathan was my brother," she said, opening her hand to reveal an old military medal, its ribbon frayed, its metal scratched. "He promised to teach me to drive when I got older. He said he'd take me everywhere as long as I studied hard." Emma paused, her gaze landing on the chair, but then her voice fractured slightly. "But he didn't come back, and no one told me why." The courtroom felt drained of air. A reporter, mid-typing, stopped, eyes red. A juror, the man with the grey tie, turned away, shoulders trembling. Emma raised the medal, her hand shaking slightly. "I kept this in a box under my bed. I thought if I held on to it, Nathan would be proud. But I want Miss Levitt to have it because she told the truth about him." She handed the medal to Levitt, her movement slow, as if giving away a piece of her heart. Levitt took the medal, her hands trembling for the first time in the trial, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She didn't wipe them away or hide them. She held the medal in both hands like a fragile treasure, then stood, turning to the jury. "Emma Bennett isn't here to accuse," she said, her voice now strong, not shouting, but like a solemn vow. "She's here to remind us that James Bennett wasn't just a name in a report. He was a brother, a son, a family's dream, and he was taken not by war, but by decisions made in the dark." The courtroom fell silent. No typing, no whispers. The camera zoomed in on Levitt's face, then shifted to Emma, standing by the chair, hands clasped tightly. Thomas on the bench gripped his gavel but didn't strike. His eyes, once icy, now seemed lost, as if facing an undeniable, shattering truth. A spectator, the woman with the silk scarf, dabbed her eyes with it, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. Levitt placed the medal beside the chair, her movement gentle, like laying a flower on a grave. "This chair isn't evidence," she said, her voice now resounding like a hymn. "It's a reminder that every decision we make in this courtroom, in halls of power, leaves an empty space. We can't give Nathan back to Emma, but we can give her the truth." She stepped back, her gaze sweeping the courtroom like a silent call to action. The courtroom was no longer a place of judgment. It had become a memorial where the chair and medal told the story of those forgotten. Thomas, on the bench, bowed his head for the first time in the trial, as if feeling the full weight of defeat. Caroline Levit stood quietly by the wooden chair, James Bennett's medal placed beside it, like a silently burning candle. The courtroom was no longer a legal arena, but a place of remembrance where the truth had stripped bare the veil of power. Emma Bennett, her eyes bright but tinged with sadness, held Levitt's hand for a moment before leaving the witness stand. The jury, spectators, and reporters were swept into silence as if no one dared break the fragile magic of this moment. Clarence Thomas on the bench sat motionless, his hand gripping the gavel, but lacking the strength to strike. His eyes, once sharp, now wandered like a man who had just seen his own ghost. Levitt returned to the defendant's table, her gaze not seeking Thomas, but gliding across the room as if memorizing every face. She said nothing more, didn't need to. The chair, the medal, and Nathan's story had spoken for her. The cameras panned slowly, capturing her standing there, small in her red dress, but like an unshakable mountain. Reporters stopped typing. Spectators stopped whispering. Thomas abruptly stood, his black robe askew. He said nothing, only signaled. To the court officer, the trial ended suddenly. No verdict, no declaration. The crowd buzzed, but Levitt didn't move. She packed her briefcase, her expression calm, like someone who had fulfilled a mission. As she left the courtroom, the heavy wooden door closed behind her, its creak like the period at the end of a tragic chapter. Just hours later, the news exploded. A brief statement from the Supreme Court's office, sent via email and posted on its official website, announced Clarence Thomas's resignation. No reason given, no comment, no press conference, no farewell speech, just a dry line, as if he wanted to vanish from the spotlight. On X, the news spread like wildfire. "Thomas resigns," one account wrote with a photo of the wooden chair from the courtroom. "Levitt did it," another posted with thousands of shares. The press, from major outlets to small blogs, raced to analyze the fall of an icon. 27-year-old woman defeats the Supreme Court. Levitt left the courtroom, descending the cold stone steps. A crowd waited, not dozens but hundreds, from mothers clutching photos of sons in uniform to veterans wearing silver medals. They didn't cheer or raise banners. They stood silently, forming a path for her to pass through. An elderly woman holding a black and white photo whispered, "Thank you." A boy, perhaps 10, held up a handwritten sign, "Nathan is not forgotten." Leavitt didn't stop or wave. She only nodded, clutching Laura Bennett's letter and Emma's medal, as if carrying their souls. She got into a car, the windows fogging under reporters' flashing lights. Inside, she opened her phone, scrolling through X. A prominent post from an anonymous account showed the wooden chair named The Forgotten. Below, hundreds of comments listed names of soldiers, sons, brothers, those lost in silence. Levitt hit share, then launched an online memorial page where families could post stories of loved ones, from James Bennett to names never spoken. Within hours, the site drew thousands, like a digital monument where truth found a home. Levitt looked out the window, her gaze softening, but not weak. She had risked everything, career, reputation, even safety, to bring the truth to light. The crowd outside still stood, not to celebrate, but to witness. They knew, as she did, that justice wasn't a court ruling, but the moment, the forgotten. Were named Caroline Levit sat on the wooden porch of a New Hampshire home, the fading afternoon sun casting a thin, golden layer over the field ahead. No red dress or camera lights now. She wore a simple green sweater, her hair loose. Beside her, her son, not yet a year old, lay in a stroller, his round eyes fixed on his mother. Her mother, a woman with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile, brought out a tray of tea, setting it gently on a scarred wooden table. The peaceful air contrasted sharply with the battle she had fought. If this story moved you, like this video, share it with those who need to hear it, and comment your thoughts below. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel to stay updated with more powerful stories of truth and courage.